Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined once again by Christian Yordanov, longevity expert. We have a link in the description, livelongerformula.com/WAM, that's W-A-M, which you could use if you want to ditch your doctor today and actually look at real alternatives out there with people like Christian Yordanov here. And we're going to go into something quite controversial today. We've talked with Christian before about things like fasting. We've talked with him about things like injections and the schedule and all these horrible things that plague children and babies. Today we're going to talk specifically about sugar, because as I've always heard, Christian, sugar is really bad for you, and I'm still pretty much in a camp where I think it probably is for the most part. I mean, we always heard about sugar is a thing that goes to the tumor, that it's a thing that causes inflammation, that with much inflammation we get illness and all these things. We know about the sugar industry's attempts to suppress fatty foods back in the 70s and 80s with major campaigns. But you say that sugar is not bad for you? Can you explain what you mean? I know you have a book on this, and you're an author, and you have a lot on this subject matter, and I'm just interested and curious at the same time.
Yeah, so I think the first thing we need to do is define what is, when you say sugar, when I say sugar, we could be thinking about entirely different things. So normally, when clients come to me and we're doing the intake and assessment, they say things like, if I eat less sugar, I feel better. So over the last year and a half, whatever, I started inquiring, when you say sugar, exactly what do you mean? I want them to be very specific. So they start saying, croissants, pain au chocolat, like candy bars. So over kind of the last 18 months, I'm like, well, that's not sugar. That is trash, glorified toxic slop that has sugar in it, as well as emulsifiers, colors, mystery chemicals we don't know the names of, things that rip up our gut, things that trigger the immune system and can cause other long-term health problems. So if you call that sugar, yes, that type of sugar is bad for you. When I say sugar, in my presentation yesterday, I was talking about table sugar just to prove a point. Right? We looked at what is table sugar, what effects does it have in the body. But when I say sugar is not bad for you, and when I say it's the least of our problems, I'm talking about natural sugar, like not fearing honey and maple syrup and fruits and fruit juices, especially from organic sources. That kind of sugar, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And but when you look at honey, as an example, and then you compare that to sucrose, which is table sugar, what is the difference? So in one case, honey is fructose and glucose, and then in the other, so we don't know what ratio. Every honey will be slightly different. Whereas sucrose, table sugar, is 50-50 glucose and fructose. So what will happen to that when you ingest it cleanly? Let's just pretend you're just eating sugar, not like Snickers. The big problem with sugar, just to make sure people understand this, it's fuel. It's very usable fuel by the body, but it is not. It doesn't have the cofactors, vitamins, and minerals that are required to turn it into fuel. So it's not an optimal source of nutrition. It's simply as a source of fuel, it's perfectly adequate, especially, again, if it's coming from a more natural form. So you have glucose and fructose. The glucose in that sugar, the brain loves. The testicles, male gonad, and actually female gonads, reproductive organs, they use glucose to create, reproductive hormones, sperm in men. Sperm use fructose to travel, to move around. So low glucose availability in an organism signals via the pituitary those hypothalamus, those glands, they kind of sense these levels, and they can actually ramp down reproductive function when there's low glucose availability. It's a great survival mechanism. You don't want to procreate when glucose availability is low.
Okay, and I want to ask you something here, but first I do want to let people know with that link below, you'll get a free metabolic function assessment with Christian, and you can talk over over your issues with them. But again, Christian, like then we also have the issue of, okay, what about all the issues of inflammation that come with sugar, where people like if I were to, for example, go on an all-meat diet, and we've talked about this in a past interview before, like, okay, I get it, maybe it doesn't work long-term, but in the short term, if I have bad issues with my lungs, if I have a cough, if I do these things, it goes away when I do this for a short period of time, like when I get rid of carbs for a short period of time. So, but what do you get rid of, like, what do you see as far as illnesses go that you've seen people get rid of with an increase of sugar and carbs?
So the first thing sugar does, or just when I say, again, let's stop saying sugar as table sugar, but let's look at, let's say, honey, just because people are like a lot more receptive to honey. If you take some honey, 50 grams or whatever, well, what that will do is actually it will not really increase your insulin and your blood sugar a lot, because it actually, even table sugar has a lower glycemic index than a lot of like things like oats, potatoes, rice. All of these things spike sugar way more than even table sugar, and honey is even less of a glucose spike. But when you do that, your cortisol goes down, right? So the first thing that's why do we stress eat? A lot of us stress eat and we eat carbs, usually crappy carbs, because the body knows that it lowers stress, right? So there's actually, when you look at, that's kind of what I was getting at, but I have a long-winded way of getting there, is when you look at glucose and fructose, together or separate in foods, sugar, honey, fruits, there's absolutely nothing inherently inflammatory about them. Now, if they've done some rat studies with fructose where they give them just fructose on its own without glucose, and tons of it on natural things, that you never see that in nature, just fructose and in those high amounts, and they have problems. And that's a lot of that fructose stuff comes from rat studies, and rats actually don't metabolize fructose as well as humans. So there's actually nothing inflammatory about fructose, because imagine nature, God creating all these fruits that are like literally the most obvious thing that's food other than milk. Imagine nature making those things inflammatory. That doesn't make any sense. And then glucose, how could that be inflammatory? Because your brain, your testicles, your kidneys, so many organs of the body, the eyes, they prefer to use this as a fuel source. So there's nothing inherently inflammatory. Again, when people remove carbs, usually what they do is they remove pasta, pizza, bread, garbage, and then Snickers, candy. So they remove sugar, but the sugar that they remove isn't the therapeutic thing. The therapeutic thing was getting the garbage out of the diet, cleaning up the diet. So I have clients with a lot of like inflammatory stuff where they eat more carbs, clean carbs, I should say. They eat more clean carbohydrates than ever before. But they clean up the diet. So they eat more carbs than ever. Clean carbs to be super, super clear. No grains either. So they eat a lot cleaner, and they eat more, and they improve, right? So a lot of the inflammatory stuff, there's other ways so you get inflamed by, again, grains and beans, and these things are a heck of a lot more inflammatory. So when people do the carnivore diet, they are inherently removing the garbage that they would have eaten. So it's not that the diet is the sugar, again, it's the elimination of all the processed crap that most of us have in the diet.
Okay, and so then I have to ask, if you have like a good herbal tea at home and say you want to add some organic granulated sugar, and then I'm talking about table sugar, is that an issue? Because I know some people will just way overdo it, and obviously excess of anything can be a problem, but like people will pour 3 packets of sugar in their tea and a bunch of milk, and they'll stir it around, and you have to ask, do you want some tea with your milk and sugar? Because it's mostly milk and sugar. Yeah. But with the granulated stuff, is that an issue? I mean, we're talking organic stuff versus obviously the really refined and often chemically induced sugars that you find at grocery stores.
So the main purpose of sugar in my life is I buy it as a great prep, because it's about this, for me, about the same price as rice. It doesn't need any prep. So with rice, you need water, heat, utensils. Sugar will brighten up your day, will spike your blood sugar less. It's ready to go. And you just have to keep it dry to last forever, whereas rice, it won't last forever, where sugar does have that chance of lasting forever. So that's how I use it, and occasionally, if you're out and about, using a bit of sugar is totally fine. But I wouldn't do that. With my clients, we're always trying to move them away from processed things to natural things, and it's just as easy to use honey and maple syrup unless you're out and about than that. So I just say do that instead. One time I remember one person, that was the only time I ever to any client recommended potentially trying sugar with water, is he had an ulcer, he had a lot of like stuff, so he couldn't sleep. But he couldn't also sleep because of the high cortisol. So we needed some clean carb in him that would like not digest, it would just absorb. So that's in the one case that I recommended that, just because the person was in a rough shape. But just before I know the cancer thing comes up, I don't want to forget to address that, Josh.
Yeah, that's actually the next thing I wanted to ask you, was just like, what about all the studies with sugar molecules going to tumors in people's bodies and all the stuff that, I mean, because that's not just, all the other chemicals that come with the junk food. Obviously, like, they are following the sugar molecules on their way to the tumor. I mean, how do we get away from that?
So, again, that research was not done too well. Now, to briefly summarize some of it, because a lot of it, it takes quite a bit of in-depth research. But part of my presentation that I didn't get to yesterday, I was going to talk about that. So the first thing to understand is tumors use glucose badly. They waste it, right? Cancer cells, a lot of the time, especially if it's driven by metabolic issues, derangement, they're struggling. So they are in like a stress state where they're just grabbing anything they can get to continue surviving. That's the imperative of the cell is to continue surviving. So if there's glucose in the bloodstream, they will absolutely grab it, but they will not. They will just kind of break it in half, make a bit of energy, which can be used to divide and grow the tumor. But then it doesn't go through those other pathways that are more complex. More nutrients are required. B vitamins, minerals, oxidative phosphorylation through the mitochondria, etc. So the reason they use glucose is because it's a fuel available always, and that's the thing people have to understand. You will never ever starve a cancer of glucose unless you die, because even if you remove all carbs completely, whether with fasting or ketogenic diet, you will continue to make glucose constantly. Maybe not as much when you're in ketosis, but you will continue always to make glucose, which you do by breaking down protein from the diet or protein on the body. So bones have protein, organs. That's why cancer patients, a lot of them, not most, but many, I don't know the numbers, probably the majority of cancer patients die from the waste in the cachexia. Right? Some of them can't eat. But then also the high cortisol state they're in is continuously degenerating them. And that's what I was going to cover in my talk as well. Is some tumors can produce not only cortisol, which will raise the blood sugar. So again, you can't starve the cancer, because some tumors will actually make the body make glucose. Other tumors create pituitary and hypothalamic hormones, ACTH and so on, that actually then stimulate the adrenals to produce cortisol. That's another way the cancer can feed itself. And then furthermore, some tumors, like pituitary adenomas, various other like carcinoid tumors, they can secrete serotonin, the happy chemical, one of the biggest scams in the health space. And serotonin can actually activate that same pathway to increase cortisol, because it's actually a stress chemical. So you will never starve cancer. And here's the thing, even if glucose availability is low, cancer cells can use glutamine, the amino acid, other amino acids. They can use fatty acids. People forget they can just as well use fatty acids in many cases. And so they use protein and lactate. So the whole thing is, yes, when they use the radioactive, tracer sugar, yes, they accumulate the sugar, but that doesn't mean that if you stop the influx of carbohydrates, it would be helpful, because again, the human body never stops producing glucose. So it's the whole starve the cancer from glucose issue is a non-starter from the get-go, and that's why we don't actually have any indication that keto or fasting does help with cancer.
It's really interesting stuff. I mean, you're certainly not winning any popularity awards for going after serotonin and saying, what people think about it, because a lot of the alternative health community is adamantly against sugar, loves serotonin, is very supportive of fasting and all that. So that's all very interesting, and we're going to have you on to talk about serotonin in the future now, because now I got to open that rabbit hole. We don't have time today for that, but I wanted to let everyone know, again, they can find that link, livelongerformula.com/WAM, W-A-M, and through us, you will actually get some pretty good deals there. The metabolic function assessment with Christian, among many other options there. Of course, he's an author, and I wanted to finish this off by, okay, you're in the alternative health world, you are talking about, longevity, and you're saying things that, again, are not very popular among that community, which makes me actually believe you more, because obviously you're losing potentially a lot of money by not going in the direction of everyone else. It's like going into, the spirituality community and saying, I don't think the book The Secret is going to save your life. It's important to understand that there's a narrative and there's the new narrative among alternative, and then those that kind of go outside of the bounds. So I appreciate that. Can you tell people, first of all, obviously we have the link in the description, but where to find your books and how to get involved with you?
Sure. And just one thing I'll say before I do that, thank you so much for having me, of course, Josh. But over this week of Anarcha, of course, that's my spiel. I tell, what's your thing? They're like, I'm into health. And then give me the gist. So I go straight for the jugular. Omega-3s are worse than even seed oils in some ways in terms of oxidative stress. Fasting is bad, low carb, keto, this stuff is, I honestly think it's being amplified with the algorithms because it is destroying young people's fertility. Fasting similarly. And people are like, almost like, imagine coming to a conference of black sheep and then risking becoming the black sheep of the black sheep. That's kind of I'm sticking my head out, knowing the humiliation, if I'm wrong, truly, that could ensue, and just being labeled an absolute moron. He's talking about fasting is bad. Everybody knows fasting is good. Jesus fasted, all that stuff. So I'm happy to put my sort of whole reputation, how I look on the line, because I know I've been looking at this stuff for years now, and I see so many people destroying their health when I work with people in a most close capacity. So happy. Thank you for. Because I know I definitely have contacted some people in the space that don't want to have anything to do with me, like on their podcast, because I'm speaking out against going full on terrain, the whole, obviously the fasting. So I'm speaking out some of these very extreme things, and some people don't like it. But at least you're, objective, and you want to have the whole truth, or at least the debate. So I appreciate you for that, brother. So folks can just go to livelongerformula.com. Masterclass is free, value packed. The book is called How to Actually Live Longer, Volume 1. You can find that on Amazon, of course. And then if you type in my name on any podcast platform, I have a couple of podcasts there, which I should have you on very shortly. We should have you on and talk about your work as well. But thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it. Again, that link is in the description, and make sure to check that out below. And as always, I tell people to hit that like button, share on social media, hit the notification bell, and hit subscribe if you have not yet already. And if you want to know more about what he thinks on things, again, that option is right in front of you, and it's very interesting indeed. Again, I found out about you at a dinner last year at Anarchapulco, and I heard that you were doing some work every now and then with Charlie Robinson, who's a good friend and someone that I very much trust, and I appreciate you going out there and doing this. So we'll have you on again soon, of course, to get deeper into some of these other issues, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much.